Good morning, and welcome back to day 2 of the Global Landscapes Forum here in Bonn, Germany, where we are focusing on rights in the landscape. And this morning, I have the pleasure to speak with Susan Gardner, who is the Director of Ecosystems Division at the UN Environment, with dedicated experience to science and environmental policy. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Lovely. So please tell us, what is the biggest challenge in achieving the goals of the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration?
Well, we know a lot about restoration.
Right.
We have a lot of experience, particularly in forest landscapes. What we have to ensure is that to really realize the full opportunity of the decade, that we are looking at restoration opportunities across all landscapes, so including peatlands, coastal areas, marine, coral reefs, looking at the entire systems that can be restored, but where we have less information, less experience on best practices. And this is really essential if we're going to be able to fully realize the full potential of the ecosystem services that can be gained through restoration efforts. So the benefits are including biodiversity, but also include climate mitigation, include increasing resilience for local communities. It includes this whole host of benefits that we have to ensure that we're understanding how each ecosystem functions so that we can ensure that when we're working in individual habitats that we can fully realize those benefits to the local communities and to the larger community and landscape.
Great. And what are the biggest challenges that you face in trying to make this happen?
Getting the information from the various stakeholders who have the real traditional experience. This is essential. And there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of interest in doing this. And we have to ensure that we're incorporating that kind of thinking, that traditional knowledge into all the processes as we move forward.
Great, because this hasn't been the ethos in the past to include, local communities, traditional methods, and when we make actions or plans. Is this something that's changed in the UN environment?
It's essential. It's
Right.
essential. We're hearing a lot about it this weekend through the conversations here at the forum, and really understanding, having a better knowledge and awareness of how essential this is. The local communities will take action, they'll invest energy if they have a stake, if it matters to them, if it matters to their families and their communities. And so we have to ensure that not only are they involved in deciding how to prioritize various restoration goals, but also how to be clear about what will be the management practices, what technologies are appropriate in that setting, and empower the communities to really be engaged in those processes and be leaders in the decision making in terms of how the lands will be used and how the resources will be distributed.
Right, exactly. So I guess it goes in my next question, how do rights play in restoring ecosystems and preserving biodiversity?
Right, it's fundamental. For all of the sustainable development goals, not only SDG 15 that is about reversing degradation of landscapes, but more broadly across all of the sustainable development goals, the right to water, to food, to freedom from poverty. These are fundamental rights that are intrinsic in what we can achieve through restoration. And so it's an essential part of ensuring that not only do we have all the communities who can be empowered and who can really affect change involved, but that also we're prioritizing the right kinds of efforts through those kinds of engagements and consultations. When you look at the local communities, they have the most to gain, but they also have the most to lose
right.
As landscapes are degraded. And so if the air is clean because of good, healthy vegetation that traps sediment and particles, then you see that in terms of the health of the families and the children.
Right.
If water is stored and absorbed in natural landscapes, then there's more access to water. And as people have to travel further to get access to clean water, it cuts into the time that they have for other pursuits.
Right.
usually this is women and girls
Right.
who are having to travel more distances for water. They have less time then for pursuits like education, for other sources of employment, economic opportunities. And so it's really pivotal in terms of exacerbating poverty and ensuring that basic human rights are protected.
And I mean, and on that, in terms of like women and women's voices, and their rights are need to be put on the forefront of this whole climate crisis. What are your thoughts on that?
We've heard tremendous voices from women and from youth in this weekend in the Global Landscape Forum.
Right.
And we've seen over and over again that when we are ensuring that women's voices are heard, that women's perspectives are incorporated, that we get a better outcome. And so we know that, and we know how to do it, and we have to work with at the national and subnational and local level to ensure we know who those stakeholders are and how to find them and how to incorporate them in the processes and engage them.
Okay, great. So how can we make the UN Decade, make sure that the UN Decade provides benefits to local people?
Well,
the practical...
the practical... The language of the resolution from the General Assembly that established the decade for ecosystem restoration specifically included and highlighted the importance of engaging women, engaging indigenous groups, engaging youth. There's a fundamental understanding of how essential that is in terms of the efforts and the success of the decade. And so we need to ensure that we have real concrete policy shifts, again at the national level and local level, to ensure that that inclusive process is maintained and is supported. And again, this is fundamental to ensuring that we're pursuing the sustainable development goals in a way that incorporates all of those rights.
So are you finding that governments are more open to include, indigenous rights and rights of local communities more now than they were before? Is it a more open relationship than it was before? Is it a change? Have you seen a...
There's a change.
Yes.
There's definitely a change. In fact, right now there's so much momentum. The next couple of years are going to be a super years for nature, quite frankly. We've got a tremendous amount of multilateral activities and opportunities. The Climate Action Summit, the biodiversity multilateral conversations that will be pursuing in the next couple of years. This is tremendous will to have progress on environmental issues more broadly. And fundamental to those are including the local communities in those conversations. Our new executive director, who just started last week, Inger Anderson, she said on her first day, there's something in the air. You can feel it. There's, never before has the environmental mandate been more visible, and the real demand we're seeing across the globe for fundamentally redesigning how we interact on the planet.
Right.
And so we're feeling this momentum. Governments are gaining more awareness of things that have been known, and incorporated into traditional practices. Traditional practices that respect resources, that use resources efficiently, that understand the power and the fragility of nature.
Right.
Governments are starting to understand that, and I think this is our opportunity to see ministers of finance come to the table and fight for incorporating the value of nature, incorporating protection and restoration of nature, because they'll understand that from an economic standpoint, there's so much potential in terms of bringing their people out of poverty and ensuring the valuable services that natural systems provide.
Yeah, great. So my final question would be, the UN Decade aims to accelerate existing global restoration goals. So how does that translate into reality?
It has to be action, yes.
Right.
We have to see action. We have so much commitments and political will. We had tremendous amount of commitments that came together through the Bonn Challenge. And we can use this political will now to translate that into action. The resolution established the UN Environment Program and FAO as being the leads for this decade, but it also establishes the mandate across the entire UN system. And so for the UN environment side, we work at that interface between science and policy. And so it's very exciting. Starting right now this weekend, we're launching a survey that is going to be global. We're asking for information from all countries and stakeholders about what are you already investing in restoration? What have you done so far? What do you plan to do? So that we can identify geographically where are the gaps, as well as ecologically, what are the critical habitats where we need to invest more? And so we can prioritize actions. So being able to have that concrete science-based information where we can identify what are the priorities and where are the needs, how do we focus all of the group of stakeholders together, and then looking at that and working with agencies like the UNDP who work at the country level and can ensure that we're getting action, we're getting policy shifts, and we're engaging all of the communities of stakeholders. So I think action requires sharing good information where we have best practices, ensuring that we are including the whole range of stakeholders and mobilizing a coalition of partners who are dedicated to this, and then ensuring that the processes are inclusive, so we're really engaging in local communities and gaining from the knowledge of the traditional practices that are essential in terms of making this work on the ground. I think that's how we build on the momentum.
Great, because I mean, I think it's not about competition anymore. The world has to be, it's all collaborative, I think.
Absolutely.
Future looking, right? I think that's what has to change, and I think that's what is changing, I think, through this conference that we've noticed.
Yes.
How has been your experience here, I guess, is my last question.
Oh, tremendous, tremendous. It's wonderful to be part of all the energy. It's for me just awakening to hear the voices of traditional leaders, of emerging youth leaders, and of all of the collective interest in ensuring that we're moving forward at this really critical time right now in our history.
Yes, for sure. Well, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.